Hi everybody, today I get to read the chapter 11 about the all the devils are there, the Hagen. And this is a continue to the video. Chapter 11, Goldman Envy. Goldman Sachs went public on May 4 in 1999, ending at year 113-year fathership and the usher in the new era, with Sherlock Holmes to answer to, a board of the direction to provide oversight, and the chief executive officer inside of the senior parent. Even at the time when tips EOPs were all ranged, Goldman public offering stood out. To the stock was practiced at 5,300 a share, but opened in 7,600. The opening was delayed only because the demand evaluation of 33 billion, the 3.6 billion the company received of the offering, made in the second largest APO ever. The average stake for the 350 farmer, 350 farmer, and the current partners who owned most of Goldman's stock was 63.6 million. Senior partner Turner CEO consoles shares that were suddenly worth 305 million. Hank Pulsman, who would become CEO, Drinkwise the EPO had stake worth 289 million. One Wall Street competitor told Business Week to have priced this much paper as a non-Chelican stock is incredible to an outside. The Goldman EPO must have seemed like a new burner, but the people connected to the field knew that they are going public. But were already Pushman hard to receive to Goldman culture. Floated the idea in the EIPO, it go nowhere over the next 5 or 6 years. The subject will occasionally bubble up something a small discussion, something affair wise meetings, but they resistant to import the majority of the parents. What made Goldman special? Some worried that they would be disadvantaged compared to the other partners who had longer stakes. Some didn't want to see Goldman financials and their compensation printed in the newspaper. In truth, however, Goldman barely needed to go public. Merrill Lynch, Lehman, and Morgan Stanley were already public companies, as were most other big Wall Street firms. Big publicity held banks to Citibanks and JP Morgan were Goldman competitors. Transformational deals were taking place that were sent by Wall Street, and those deals used stock and currency. Wall Street firms that when Republic student lead had what Charles Ellis, the Goldman historian, called substantial permanent capital. They could take more risk. They would run more rapidly. They were no longer relying on the partners. Capital firms that they didn't go public would in all likelihood be left begging. When Carney became senior partner in 1994, he made it his mission to present his parent about necessity of an EPO. In this, he succeeded. The deal was originally supposed to happen happened in the fall of 1998, but had a be postponed envisaged. When Goldman got account up to the Russian crisis, the collapse the long-term capital management. Even when the EPO finally took place the following spring, It was with no initial turmoil shortly before it finally went off. Cornice was outed in the Place Cup, replaced the Paulson, allowing the Chang'e Islanders what a now Premier Officer Consuner staying on until the EPO was completed, and John Whitehead, he of the famous Fortune Business Principles, wrote a unwished letter to the Goldsman partners. I don't think anyone who doubts that the decision of the many of parents, particularly the younger men, knew better more on the selling amounts to be deposited in their capital seconds that on what they felt would be good for the future of Goldman Sachs. The EPO was a critical turning point for Goldman Sachs. Over time, its culture did change as the company. As the company, you will already call it infirm. Performance and growth, the Firewell senior partner used to say the return on quality trading for the business, and starting in early 2 millions. Goldman having adjusted to life at public company and having transformed instead to the money machine went on the run the likes of which has already been seen in the annals of corporate America. Its 2,000,003 renotes were 16 billion, there rose to 21 billion in the 2,004, 25 billion in 2,005, and nearly 38 in 2,006. More than double weight just as before its market cap the year dropped 18 billions. Somehow Goldman always seemed to be in the weak spot of every marker. Somehow Goldman always seemed to react to big marker shift faster than anyone else. Somehow Goldman never seemed to make a wrong move. But nobody could quite say how. As Goldman began generating most its renown from trading, it becomes impossible of outsiders to see how Goldman was making its money trading, praying a lot of things I can mean acting marker. They didn't call your of the naked, rip your throat or for quarter, sell their grandmother for a penny and sell to grandmother for two principals, government on private equity executive. The rest of Wall Street watched Goldman metamorphoses with a mixture of envy, frustration, and resentment. But even as a Goldman peers questioned and criticized it for its transformation, they also tried to copy it. The money, but the profits the firm produces and the paychecks its parents got made Goldman the firm that everyone else had to keep up with and to the outside world. It looked like they had become like Goldman. They all embraced risk taking and they all began to produce outside profits. And yet the crisis will show that they were like it Goldman at all. In the memory on the brick, Paulson recalls the moment when he went to talk to Cornice after the coup had been completed. Cornside has just learning his fate. He'd been informed that by John Train, Goldman CFO, and Cornside's close friend. In 2007, Dane was named chief executive of Merrill Lynch. During the worst weekend of the financial crisis, he negotiated its merger with Bank of America. Hank, I underestimated you. Side consign according to Paulson, I didn't know you were such a tough guy. In fact, there was a lot about Hank Paulson that was surprised. He was deploying Christian scientists whose word brains was too many date cookies. Despite a many figure network he invaded against copious combustion, he was almost absolutely frugal, a trend he inherited for his father, and Illion's whatever. He and his wife Wendy, whom he married during his second year at Harvard Business School, were avid conservationists and financial bruise wakers throughout their obviously lived in New York. The Paulsons' homestead was in the Midwestern prairie on the far in Brighton Legions. It was Paulson had grown up. As a later Paulson was cut from a very different cloth than, say, Bob Robin. He once told his Alsum magazine that I'm not an inspirational leader, I'm just not. He didn't lead by charm or by later people to the way of taking by asking. What do you think? Richard, he was forced nature, and his magnanimous style was marked by the king of brutal pragmatism. His preferred mother was raving into action rather than sitting back, waiting, and patiently strategizing. He was directing to a fault, outright lacking the verbal slickness that the sibling requires. At about 6 foot 2, with a ball that still mainly resembled the Dartmouth football player he didn't owns been, and gravelly vice to boot. Paulson had an aggressive about him that made people think he was much bigger than he was, and which could intimidate people into silence. This quality also some people to understand Paulson has customers had, but doing so was a mistake. He had mind that was superintendent detail oriented, nauseous, and clever. He also, a swimming word ethic, had at the same time missiles, says former Golden partner. If you Motorola meets to a financings, he calls Motorola 7 times. He doesn't stop. Paulson will always tell the firm's bakers that they had to something new to offer, which aids and every call. He had losing whether he was on the ski slopes or training to halt a deal. Unlike his predecessor, Cornyside, or this eventual successor, Lloyd Blakeley, Paulson was an investment banker, not a fixed incomer trainer. He had spent the early part of career doing banking deals out of Goldman. Chicago officer, prior to join Goldman, Paulson had served as an assistant to John R. Chairman in the Nixon administration. He became partner in 1982, Hager years after joining the firm, resigning to be co-head firm's investment banking department and the chief operating officer before taking over as CEO in 1999. Investment banker, though he was Paulson, did not try to turn back the clock. He said early that training and fictive income were just the future of to the firm. They were the present, thus the hiring for the investment bankers at Goldman had been the internet bubble, which burst early into millions, not like Angel Falso took control of the firms. When it collapsed, the business changed in ways that Burt Goldman claimed demanded low-priced loans in change for making business, and Goldman found himself at the deep disadvantage. Odds against full-reserve banks like Citi and J.P. Morgan. Paulson had two of nearly 3,000 employees and reduced of the investment banking division by 10%. A sentimentalist, he has not never again won investment banking. The raising of capital for companies via a sizable component of Goldman results. In fact, in the years after Paulson took over, the investment bankers who had risen to the top of the firms and were jockeying to be Paulson her apartment when pushed aside. Then, for instance, left to run the New York Stock Exchange by 2,000,003. It was claimed that never never apparent to the in June of that year. Brinkley 1049 became the Goldman board member in December. He was named president and chief operating officer. Paulson, however, always made the point saying he was going anywhere. Theirs is not fear, and for those who want me to go, no hope to the fortune in 2,000,004. Brinking me had joined Goldman via in acquisitions of J. Aaron, the commodities trading firm, and up by the bootstrap kid from the Bronx, and put himself through Harvard and Harvard Law. Franklin had joined G. Aaron as a gold salesman in 1981. The same for Goldman brought the firm to the two organization codes have been more different, whilst Goldman was becoming a great short firm. J. Aaron was a throw trading, saving highly, and temporal trading shop, street fighters in the words of Dennis Shirk, the former J. Aaron executive who hired Blankfein in the classic trends, wrote of the Trumbull culture. Blanking himself later. He joked that at J. Aaron, we didn't have the word client or customer, we had computers, and that's because we didn't know who to spell the word. Adversary for years, J. Aaron, but is now separate elevator bank and Goldman equities at 85 Broad Street, preventing the staff from internally. I created a feeling inside J. Aaron of use against the world, says a former Goldman magazine director. Has son a Goldman academy. J. Aaron provides promptly. Has a rose, he lost weight about 50 pounds, quit smoking, and shaved his beard. He also reposed his repaint sharp, with into the agony self-deprecating sense of the humor, says a former Goldman trader. Jolon got really refined, but used to be just a killer. Blankfein has had a verbal detectory Paulson liked, and although he wasn't physical proposing, though talking to other types were drawn to him. One parent described it as a bit of a strong phenomenon. As Brinkley rose, he pushed hard to complete the transformation that had begun under Robin had accelerated other Paulson. What this meeting and something to complete with claims to or trade against them. In the trading business, Goldman was just hating its risk, but actively seeking to profit for this own account. In other words, instead of training to avoid conflicts of interest with clients, Goldman embarrassed them and made money from them. It was an attitude that on competition in 2 million for described as somewhere between mercenary and pragmatic. Hidden field managers and private equity executives alike complaining that while they no longer treasured the firm, they did business with Goldman because they had to. The firm was so dominated and so much better at everything that everyone else was you pretty much had not noise. By 2 million for training a comment for 75 75% of government profits, while investment banking had shrunk to about 6%. Some there was a widespread cliche. Goldman was just a giant hedge fund that was ending in the proprietary training and investing for this own account. Goldman's always inside that I had something no habit fund had customer, and that was true. As Goldman Chief Financial Officer David been never explained into in on the on a 2 million tree call. There's a small percent for that training that's probably proprietary, and this is a small percent that is purely customer driven. But the great majority of what we don't will be driven by training with customers where customer ask us to do a transaction or we're hiding something for them and then we will hold a position for the wheel, or we may well it to price it into the market. It's very hard to break out what is proprietary and what is customer. And when blankly inside that nothing had changed and that Goldman recognized that its success was due to the client's efficiency. Goldman might earning a free from the ideal or make it and money, but putting is all capital to work as a part of the deal, or both. It means be in the other side of trading in order to satisfy a client, not upside another risk elsewhere in this book, or because Goldman thought the other side where money could be made. The many facets of Goldman's employment meeting help clients because it meaning get a trade done that will outside be difficult, or it may hurt them in ways that were hard see from the outside of many. But at one point Goldman bakers from Birmingham began to farther to refer to has front of the house, meaning they were the salespeople for the firm's product. Were told that the ways should were more derivatives, but it a Barker asked Goldman's for exchanges desks for the price of currency is wrapped neighbor. The breaking not the client had any way of knowing how much profit making his trading desk was building in the was the client scene, and a client's whole Goldman over some sort responsibility it was the client's not willing contemplating. In this new era, Goldman's first duty was to in autumn bottom line, which according to the shareholders clients were a means to that end, not the end. And in and of them side, Goldman claims franchises face another big advantage. Customers trains gave to firm extraordinary instincts into that was happening in the market. Brinkley was speak of being so close to clients. that you can see the partner better than anyone else what he meeting tools he didn't put in this way. Once the Goldman had become the host of the casino, it would see all the cards, whereas the other players will see only their own hands. Goldman's always defended its transformation as not only smart but necessary. At a meeting of managers director in London in the fall of the 2007, Blinken told the assembled crowd that we know the change we would have been irrelevant, and if that was a overstatement, it was certainly wrong that Goldman would have been a far cement firm, but it was also true that Goldman's single remaining focus on maximizing profits made its parents extraordinary. Within in 2003, Paulson made 21.4 million, with Bentley man 20.1 million. In 2004, the men's side 29.8 million and 29.5 million, representatively according to company firms. Not very long ago, $1 million payday was considered a sterling year. Now business of 5 millions, 10 millions, 15 millions were not uncommon, and the more Goldman grew and the other men at the top of Goldman earned, the more grayness the rest of the street became. There was one KY in which Goldman's age didn't change, and this had as much to do with its success as the many ways in which it didn't change. Goldman Sachs practiced risk management with an unblinking rigor that no other firm on Wall Street came closest to matching. No heaven J.P. Morgan, which had practiced invented modern risk management. The firm most central did not take BAR or any other border risk model, as Gospel and former risk messenger says their phrases. The model says so was potential freeing offenses. When I came to manage risk, Goldman had what can only be called a kind of humility. I believe the model. Goldman understood that risk could bring rewards, yes, but I could also bring investor. There were several specific things that the film didn't difficult differently. It permits Goldman was distinguished for using what's known a mark-to-market accounting, meaning that I market its books every day at the price of which securities traded in the market. CEO David Vinators traced this discipline to the Goldman Sachs partnership. People came into the partnership at the centenary value, and they left partnership at value. He then said, if a trader said there wasn't a price for a particular position, Goldman made it force him to sell a little bit, just to see what the price was. There was not pretending. Goldman also carefully monitored his access to cash, which are critical for an investment bank. Unlike commercial banks, which a government insured the possession, investment banks are once founded, which basically means they have the constantly raising capital in the markets. In the market show down of the extended period of the time, there did that wise. Goldman's keep was basically a packet bank full of short-term securities, 14 billion in 2004, set aside in case of emergency. We asked how much money under the most adverse condition could disappear in the given day. Paulson writes in the memory that was very different from the BR standard for calculating potential day losses, and BAR assumed normal market rating that rebounds knows. There was also several screenshot aspects to Goldman's approach to risk management. At almost Western Fields, they became office, made up the controllers and risk managements, and accountants. Its kings to no man's land, back office employments don't produce amounts or praise less, are generally treated like inferiors, but at Goldman's, this organization was called the Federation, and it was powerful. It included a separate group of the controller who independent checked training marks. At its helm sat Biner, who himself sat on Goldsman privileging training for executive suite right next to Paulson and Blankfein. But the single most important didn't was this at Goldsman people talked to each other all the time about what is going on the field and on the training desk. But the good and the bad, Banais once joked that he standing some say to him about Gary Cohn make this long time. Conceit Landing, who became chief operating officer and president in 2006. You two are like camp consumers. You talk to Gary more than me more or mom. Since a former trading once had to confess big losses to Con, I told him bad stuff and he handled it. If they go run the desk, told the president of most other firms the news I read carries. He won't like him. Information didn't get stuck in Solions and because Franklin came from the trading business. Trading business and the Wall Street signaling paid and supposedly accomplished elite. A mile north of Goldman Wall Street office, in a high-rise complex a stone throw from Ground Zero, stood the headquarters of another venerary Wall Street institution, once with name that the most American was far better known than Goldman Sachs. This firm was Merrill Lynch. It had founded in 1914 by an intense ambitious stockbroker named Charlie Merrill, whose notion of the how to succeed on Wall Street was completely different for anyone else at the time. Merrill's idea, like his London crusade, was to sell stock and bonds to the American middle class. For the most of industry, Merrill made its money by bringing Wall Street to Main Street. A phrase its founder coined, Merrill Lynch was the drowned her. That was Lynch's on America and its breaking offices. All over the country, unemployment its peak, some 16,000 brokers. Merrill's core broking division was good, solid, profitable business. This was a specialty through after 1982, when the combination of the long bull market and legal change that caused people to begin investing for their own retirement turned tens of millions of middle-class Americans into investors. Merrill had a fixed income division and investment banking division. It had a quality analysts who were highly retained by institutional investors. The amount of such things it had business that ranking had on the language tables, and it had been an absolute tribulence in Going Republic, which it didn't in 1971, only the second firm to do so. The firm was much smaller, Morgan Stanley and Goldman Gold, and Americans. By the early 2 millions, there was no firm suffering from the worst case of Goldman envy and the Merrill Lynch. The primary reason of the was this in 2002, Merrill Lynch elevated its president E. Stanley O'Neill to be a new CEO. O'Neill had joined Merrill as trader on the Young Bond desk in 1987 when he was 35, prompt, prickly, intolerant of dissent, and quick to take of dissent at perceived singles. O'Neill had never worked as a stockbroker and had no particular affection for the business that had long been Merrill's heart and so his burning ambition was to change Merlin. He wanted to transformation his modern Merlin culture, which the view has bloated and soft, not equated to the times. He wants to change it, and he wanted to put new emphasis on trading, especially fixed income trading, where the fat profits lie under O'Neill. Merlin got into the business of lending money to private equity firms in Boston. Its proprietary desk in Greatland expanded commodities trading business, and it bulked up the montage desk. Most O'Neill and Neil pushed Merlin to take more risks and bigger risks. Goldman Sachs like risks. After all, isn't that how one made Goldman Sachs likes profiles? Stan O'Neill was a king of the men who walked bristling ever at comments that were meant as praise, so it's not surprised that he never found the label African American CEO to his listen, yet it was living. They living in Boston project until his father established himself an assembly line worker at Neverly, student program by the General Motors Institute. Now, now has created University. GM then hired him as a chief foreman outside his graduation and gave a Mercer scholarship when he was accepted at Harvard Business School. Once O'Neill had his MBA, General Motors put him in a treasury department and gave him a series of promotions. Although he was a right corner at GM, O'Neill took a job at Mary because he did, and it offered him more opportunity. By 1919, he had been put in charge of the junk bond desk, where he quickly impressed the top boss, which drove his effectiveness and ruthlessness, something he would continue to do as made his way to up ladder. As a really fund began put on the by O'Neill of Comasi was impressed. The one thing about Saint Komansky later told the New Yorker was the need gets things done. But jolly 2,000,001 O'Neill had been named president of Merrill Lynch. Crossley had planned to stay as CEOs for a few more years until Turner 55, but two events forced too early. The first was 9/11. Several Marion employees died attack and the firm equalities were binding demand. During after the attacks, O'Neill took charges with economic paralysis. O'Neill firming the vacuum recalls on the former executive, concluded the Wall Street was unlikely to recover quickly after 1918. O'Neill's Institute, Big Law's Committee, counting him against too much funding a public banklands, so soon after the terrorist attacks, but O'Neill had no patience for such thinking. Second law, I throw O'Neill simply was his before. Once he became president, he cultivated K. alias. In the firm who had ties to board members, they began against for O'Neill to take over a point that the firm called way to make the change. O'Neill had in mind by the end of 2002. Konamazai some access to O'Neill's, the man that gave up to roles as well. Thanks to Johnson around O'Neill's ascension, the Merrill Lynch executive suite had become a very political place. His appointment as CEO didn't end the place in through strategy, though the next round of intrigue came not from his many enemies in the firm, but from to his closest allies. One was Archer Zakaria, the head of global markets and investment banking, the other Tom Patrick, who had been Marlin chief officer. O'Neill had told the board he didn't feel any need to fill the position. Within the matter of months, Patrick began begging O'Neill's back to the board, pushing a board's members to assign that O'Neill named a president and promotion Sakira for the job. The reason Patrick's ploy always been the mystery, even the people at Merlin. Rose Zakaria didn't not openly join Patrick after. He knew about the lowing and was lurking in the shadows. At losing a board member was ready to do Patrick Brenning. But then in July 2003, somebody with space in O'Neill's ear told him what was going on. O'Neill responded fiercely. He went to a board, laying out what Patrick and Sakira were doing and demanded that they board back. Him which didn't they had Patrick escorted from the building. By the early August, he had been remaining. Now he become suspicion for everyone around him. Patrick and Sakira, when establishing competent executive, he replaced them with more prevalent lieutenants. He treasured no one but himself. Although O'Neill didn't realize his not way to compete with Goldman Executive Committee members all the participate discussion about all the various business. O'Neill by contrast inside that the company executive speak only to him about their business and not discuss the business with one another. The Goldsman brace inside of the knowing bad news. Merlin executives trembled all at the thought of giving O'Neill bad news. Whenever Goldsman CEOs had to make an important decision, he consulted with a handful and advised to solicit their advance. O'Neill rarely asked for input when he was preparing to make the decision, and under no circumstance didn't want to change it once he had made up his mind. A few years after the ouster of Patrick Sakira reigned flaming once O'Neill Olymps. O'Neill says, "This is getting too painful. Stan, I don't understand." "You mean by too painful? I'm just distracted with you repenting framing. I don't think we can have dinner anyone." I say O'Neill, they never didn't. The married culture pre-O'Neill had always been fearful of risk. There was a good reason for this. When the firm got too aggressive, it often got shorter Merlin after, and the firm that pressure organized country to the derivatives in early in 1990s, resulting in the country 1994 buying competition and Hugh Blankets and a 30 million fine for Merlin in 1987 during the early days of mortgage banking securities of a Merlin Lynch mortgage trade naming Howard Rubin lost 250 millions on one traded. That loss was a big note that Merlin stayed away from taking significant risk in the mortgage business. 4 years, a decade later, during the long-term capital Magamans crisis, Merlin struggled to maintain its liquidity, fearing at a gunpoint that its biggest retained money market fund brought the book. A potential disaster. O'Neill had been Merlin's chief financial officer during the LTCM crisis. Anytime a trust lost 50 million recall of former Merlin traded, it was like the Spain in questions. You could take big risk with accepting the responsibility of the losses, and there was something that Merlin just called stomach. Thinking of a loss risk just was the part of this culture. O'Neill pushed hard to change that. According to former Merlin executive, he was constantly asking the various desks why they didn't, and they constantly compared Merlin performance to Goldman. You didn't want to stand office the day Goldman reported anyone's recalls of his foreign licensings. Everybody on Wall Street had a big mortgage desk, Merlin Lynch included. By the time O'Neill became CEO, They were all beginning into the focus on underwriting characteristic. The obligation that included as a some percent of subprime mortgage. With this new CDO market up the grabs, Marilyn decided to go all in the within just a few years. Marilyn was denominated underwriter of CDOs, taking the business from 9 CDOs deals worth 2.2 billion into 2 million two to 38 deals worth nearly 19 billions in 2 million four. It weekend broke business. The man who had the ultimate authority over the mortgage desk for the Merrill Lynch in those days was veteran trade neighbor Jeff Crontal. He had spent his crescent road. His essential bit was Merlin's role shown to be a create structures that allow investors to gain exposure. There are things you want to sell, not hold. He used to tell the traders who worked from him. In O'Neill's push to have firm take one risk, Cromwell himself in tricky position. Once they're gone, Cromwell didn't have a protector in the executive suite. More important, everyone around him was creating CDOs, as they called Cromwell's boss. Don Kim hated all the fixed income. Stan was inclusive, pounding on him about we weren't making as such in Kern Aleman of Goldman. Safe or former executive has O'Neill Pushman Kim Pushman. From below Merlin Crontaylor. CDOs contained an acute of veteran training. He didn't care about rules. If one manager didn't give him the answer he wanted, the constant out another manager. All they cared about was him and was team. He was always training to live and take this team with him. Crontal belief was let him go, but thou came through Merlin. Need 10 more salesmen just like him. He was executive, the king of aggressive risk taker that O'Neill wanted at Merlin. According to the some who did the business with Jim Ricciardi was simply manager. Was investor recalls to looking an early recurring deal included credit card received as well as mortgage securities. It has very limited default history. That investor asked what happened on the security in the if the credit card defaults starting to rise. Recurring had no good answer, and the investor walked away from the idea. But Ricardo's time agreement to the minor the rating agencies in to give most of the deal a triple-A rating. Richard knew exactly what he be hired to do. He started Bish to ensure it has standing supports in 20% in Owen, a mortgage organization founded by D. Dallas. By 2006, says Dallas, Merlin was pushing to take liens will generate more Merlin CDOs. In short order, Merlin was create mortgage-backed securities of the mortgage in broad warehouse the new securities on called Merlin into CDOs and negotiate hard with the rating agencies and the trinket with the CDO's structure. Reckoning was not became CDOs. Finally, recreated his vanguard of the practice randomly by the Triple B, making some portion of the CDOs into the CDOs. Those will Triple B be turned into Triple A tranches, which were much easier to seal. Richard fooled some to buy and any piece of shit, says some former Merlin executive. Cromwell didn't have any moral objection to the CDO business. Nobody on Wall Street didn't, but was hand at the business. He was keen to fake sure Merlin himself was worth so poorly. In early 2006, Ricardo suddenly left Merlin. He jumped to co-affirm management many of the CDOs. The Ricciardi had sold at Merlin. he became French president. The CEOs he said the same to Stan O'Neill. A few months later, in April, Merlin's director and top executive topped the people beach of the site during into the work session that discussion centenary of Merlin's fixed income department. The world has changed, O'Neill told Assembly executive, according to several people who were there. Fixed income and a credit, he added, were no longer clinical in nature. There was going to be an ongoing demand of fixed income products. We need continue our ability to take a risk and manufacture products, he said. By then, Cromenthal was beginning to fear the montage market was becoming overtaken. He bosses starting with O'Neill feel oversight. They wanted more people like Riccardi, not forever, not forward. They wanted to build mortgage organization just like Littman and some of the other films had. They wanted to raid other films to bring in aggressive young talent. Cromenthal, the hour was getting late. In a Merlian would be better. Severate pulling back. At the offside, Cromenthal is now him gives a series of presentations and only the risks and the possibilities. In Merlin's various 16 come desk in 2,000,005, Cromen had been Merlin's highest paid non-executive employee, with a bonus of more than 20 million. That sum was testament to the profit his desk were making a merrill to the board that day. Croman and his them were protected as the graveyards that the seasoned hands who knew how to take smart risks. 6 weeks later, they were all fired. Well, the chapter 12, the funny folios. George W. Bush believed in home ownership too in June 2002. 9 months after 1918, the president traveled to Atlanta, where in the African American church in the city's south side, he unveiled his homeownership agenda entitled Born Pride for the American Dream. It promotes homeownership among minorities. The administration Global Bush, however, in American stinks in the audience that day was in the naming Franklin Delano Reines, the chief executive of FNMI. It was a triumphant moment for Reines, and not only because he was a minority himself, the first African American CEO of the Fortune 500 company, along with the Leland Brenzel, in a chief executive of Freddie Mac. Reines had gone to Atlanta today a best of the White House, which wanted to him to be a part the administration ownership of the events of that day. For the controversies that has dogged and GSA, the new administration seemed to signal that I call life in the Fannie and Freddie's. Just the way their way. A few months later, at White House conference on minority homeownership, the president went outside to the press Reiner's stewardship of FNMI, and yet Reines thought he could raise easily. He was drawn wrong within a year. A Bush White House would the in-game a bitter war with a Fannie and Freddie. By the end, in 2004, the war was with Reines, his job, well-famed Reines. These events created an enormous amount of storm or doubt in Washington, but only bitterly changed the administration had started the war because its failure at Fannie and Freddie's had become so big. They posed a scientific risk to a financial system. The White House wanted to force GSA. Reines would later call it a gravelly group of making matters worse because it would help it push the GSA. Into budgeting risk mortgage at executive the wrong time just as important. This interesting focus on the dangers famous and Freddie supposed to the system allowed Congress and regulation to turn a blind eye to the systemic risks that were building up inexorably in the private market after all the eclipse. The wings of the GSA was your primary objective. Then you got inclined to look skeptical at their private competitor. Will you? What will you? Frank Rins, as everyone called him, was the chemically posthumous Horatio Alder. Born poor, he attached himself to the meritocracy and wrote it for all it was worth. He raked up to in the Seattle. His father as a custodian for the city parks department. His mother a cleaning woman for Wayne, a company whose board Raines would later serve on. After he became famous Mays, CEO Raines liked to recall that his father didn't make enough money to get a 30-year fixed rate mortgage. The only way that he could buy a home was not an accessory rate of interesting to had money lender. Raines earned a scholarship to Harvard. Her was joined by the younger Democrats and the young Republicans, and was named Rhodes Scholar. After graduation from Harvard Law School, the intermediate in the Nixon White House, in the reserves in the Carter administration before leaving to become a part of Lazar Fraz's, where he spent in the next years, 11 years. The scene he had enough of non-stop travel that was life of investment banker. He kept with knowing what he was going to do next. In 1991, Jim Johnson offered him the chairmanship of FMI, the same job Johnson had held. He was Maxwell protege. Ryan said yes. Fanny's office were just mile and a half from Rice's home in Washington. 5 years later, he jumped back the government, becoming to the head of the office's management board of the banking of the Bill Clintons. Second term. When Ryan asked the president how long the job was, Clinton replied, "Until with your balances with your 2 years." Charismatic, smart, and thorough, he had extraordinary presence, recalls and due government, obviously with the clients once included Freddie Mac. You see him, you meet him, you want to believe him. There were people in democratic circles who speculated, and the midnight something became the first black president of the United States. By the adversaries, the fine smile the Reynes enabled was well, allowing maintaining it unitary dominated the traditional mortgage market, quarantining almost their quirks and the $1 trillion worth of security mortgage, many of them their year fixed rate loans. It was so powerful that I essentially dedicated the terms under which prime bureaus could get such loans. Its other far profligate business, buying up mortgage and mortgage-backed securities to keep on its own books, was growing by the lengths and broads it held by them. More half $1 trillion were mortgage assessment on its book. Fannie was just beginning to trim. I didn't care for a credit risk to the extent the subprime mortgage could help the company meet its affordable housing goals. Fannie had better ways to reach reason goals, was that would dent its profits. By the end of the 1990s, Fannie and Freddie's combined assistance exceeded the GDP of any national expert the United States, Japan, and Germany, according to research report by Stanford Bernstein. There was even talk encouraged by the GSE that Fannie and Freddie's 30 years was not going to replace 30 years U.S. Treasury debt as the United States banking bond. Then where was the GSE Regulation Office of the Federal Housing Enterprise Oversight? It was a non-factor, woeful, underserved, dependent on Fannie and Freddie for information, and regularly trounced by Fannie's congressional alliance on the race occasion it tries to reiterate himself. Fannie's capital requirements were minimal, its level was sky high, over 16 of one, its earning rates growing steadily, while its stock rose tenfold during the decade. Famous executives, their competition tied to the company, enemies, goals, got very rich. It still had critics, of course, but I had proved time and again that I could set them away like in internet fly, which Perval explained who not long after becoming CEO in 1998 Ryan's met with some of the company's investors and laid out an extraordinary target. He felt confident. He said that the company could double the earnings per share over the next 5 years from 3.23 to 6.1846 dollars hundred. The number became a king of mantra with the finest smile. Even is the chief international auditor, who is supposed to be immune to energy concerns, once told his job. By now, everyone is just must have 6.46 rating. Your brains, you must be able. In retrospectively, it's hard to see target has anyone but rubbish for the driving. And why is the rate home worship approving in 68% in 2,000,002, an all-time high? How much could that the market really grow? A former Fannie executive recalls the after rains and knowing his new target. All the vice president in the company looked at each other and said, "How is this going to work?" I threw the only way finance may cloud continue its rapid growth was keep expanding in controversial mortgage portfolio. As you recall, there was no particularly but housing reason for a many state of such. It's that it very important for Amy and Freddie's to buy up mortgage market going. Since the financial crisis, in fact, Fannie and Freddie were huge buyers of derivatives, quickly likely the biggest in the country. But headings don't always work. Its critics feared that if there was a growing shift and interesting rates in Fannie began taking big loss, the taxpayers would be the ones picked up the tab. After all, Fannie had come close. They bring many years early before David Maxwell saved the company. If there was one thing Reines had interesting Jim Johnson, it was a pugnacious attitude toward anyone who direct characterized Fannie Mae. Says a former Fannie executive for his parents will later say, "We never had any illusion at Fannie's that we were all powerful. If he were all powerful, we would have to fight so many battles all day, every day. We feel the same." As Fannie Mae really didn't become basing of the veracity of Fannie's response to companies and the country's ultimate determinant, the first real shot across Fannie's bow during the Reagan's era came even before the Bush administration took office. Larry Summers, who was by the Treasury Secretary, decided to come out in favor of the reforms. There was not way Breaking Bill was going to pass. The combination of the lame duck Democratic administration and Republican controlled Congress and finance is the Freddy's political power. Made that obvious, but Summers wanted wall alarm before. Treasury worked testily for the bill it would invest in and the political capital maybe Summers through the next administration will pick up the codkill. But he could see out to declaring the risks posed by Fannie's and Freddie's for office like Greenspan and Summers. There was something offensive about the GSE, the moral hazard that existed in the banking system and that was in the obvious during the financial crisis was something. Policy makers could see, but the mortal hazard posed by Fertini and Freddie, that they could see plain as day. In 1990s, Sommer made a speech at a Women of Housing and Financial Conference, which include the sentences about the Fannies and Freddie, debates about systematic risk also include government. Fannie's vice chairman Jack Ronley called Treasury to complain about the attack, Rainey Kylie Summers personally, but expressed outrage. A few months later, it was Take Your Daughters to Work Day. Summers wrote to Dick Dauber's son from Treasury Executive. Oh, is that it like Rosa Parks asked of the Summers the signature. Finally, on the March in 2002, in 22, in 2 million, Assistant Treasury Secretary Gary Gentleman testified in favor of Baker bill. On Treasurer should consider counting the GSA 2.5 billion lines of a credit with the federal government. The Congress quickly rose to Fannie defense with a weak Rick Ignacio, the Republican chairman of K Housing Subcommittee, knowing that was the end of the story, being the sense for a period of about a year. The Treasury Department also need. The meetings were conducted at Fannie's May instigation of the effort to appease its crisis. Fannie Mae had put together the series of vocabulary intimate that hope to get treasure sing. But the treatment between Summers and Rains was horrible. It was wrong for my executive. The two of them were so alike. This person explains their ways but arrogant, stone son of bitches. And they both viewed Temsley as a smartest guy in the room. Somers simply didn't believe the finest team would explain it was necessary for any to own that huge portfolio or mortgage receiver. The intimates turned into the mail into this main comedy of terrors. Freddie Mac having rotten kids offending didn't and end around working out the deal to announce the intimate with Richard Baker. The weekend before that announcement, however, Fannie's Mae discovered that Freddie was going up it. So joining his talk part to a lesson. That never happened, and without the treasurer on the board, the Infinites did little to kill the criticism. It was a pure political calculus, the initially caused for a Bush administration to decide to leave Fine Freddie alone is not a White House didn't understand the issue or that there weren't a making of crisis inside the administration, but Fanny also had some internal defenders. The idea of the National Economic Council was Steve Friedman and former Goldman Sachs senior partner who had run the firm with Bob Rubin. He had been on the family's board of directors. Business Fannie and Freddie could be used to support Bush ownership bonus fields. Yet, one of leading findings leaders in the Bush administration was not anymore anonymous White House economist. He was of the OFHEO. His name Armando Falco Jr. and was famous and Freddy's regulators like rains in Texas. Government before landing in a job in 1990s as a general counsel of the Breaking Committee. After losing the race Congress, Falcon was nominated to the year after. He was early fortunate when he ran the agency anonymously. Every year, it seemed OFHEOs proposed voted with cause asked by the Congress or the White House. When Falcon first took office, he later recalled his discovery that some risk examinations were being put in 2 million. In the year after he took the job, President Maurice Hinch blindly offers an amendment on the floor of the House to increase FEHEO budget. Falcon would later testify. The amendment was aggressively opposed by the chairman of the by who approximates subcommittees who was lectured come and personal for the acquiring the amendment didn't. Given it this attitude toward the GSA, the Bush White House was not early support of Air. Remembrance in 2002, Falcon decided to intimate study of my system risks posed by the GSA and would be how to imagine it more important topic. Will also be hard to imagine a topic more likely to inflame Fannie Mac. Be early in 2003, EOFEHO was to replace its support. Its role was most companies would have accepted some Christians with a most a press release supernatural, but according to Falcon, Reigns and the Fannie Mae immediately went to overlay mode of a few days before the report was the set issues Reigns called Falcon and asked he to use it. When I reaffirmed my plans, Falcon's letter said, he determined a bring down we. And don't we? Finds my investigation in for the effort to appease its critics. Fannie Mae had put together a series of voluntary intentions to its hope to get Treasury to synthesis include the such measures and disclosing more information about its interesting rate risk. It was classic fame main. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But the chasm between Summers and Rice was horrible. In the words of former executive today of the were so alike. This person explained they were both arrogant student sons of bitch, and they both married tensibly as they wardens go in the room. Summers simply belied the famed theme in then explicit. The Infinite turned into a small comedy of errors. Freddie Mac, having Gotham with finding plans, did an end around working out to the deal with Richard Baker the weekend before and opened. However, Fannie Mae discovered the treasure to think of the Infinite's treasure was finally that never happened, and without the treasure on board, the Internet did little to kill the Christianism. It was pure political calculus in the intimate causing the big administration to decide to feigning and freeing alone. It's not that the White House didn't understand the issue or what Warren made in a crisis inside the administration, but Finney also had internal defenders. Yet one, the leading fine headers in the Bush administration was some anonymous with White House economist. He was the deed of effort. He likes Raymond Falcon was a product of the military, the son of the aircraft technical from San Antonio, Texas. Falcon had gone to the University of Texas Law School and the Harvard Kennedy School of the Government before landing a job in 1990s as a general counsel of the House-breaking committee after losing a raid of Congress. Falcon was nominated to head a firm. He was in early 14s when he ran at the agency, and certainly he sent men who liked poker and cigars. Every year, a summit of OFOEs proposed Bowies was cut either by Congress of the White House. When Falcon first took office, he later recalled he discovered that some risk examinations were begun. The agency estimated that I needed 16 examiners to do this job. Its job property. It had 70. Orpheus entry budget which ranked between 19 million and 74 and 30 million was less a total compensation of 4 top executives at Fein and Fredley. In 2 million the year after he took job, Representative Maureen Sanchez Blinken offered an amendment on the floor on the House to increase Orpheus budget. Falcon would later testify. The amendment was angrily opposed by the chairman and the BA Hugh Upperly subcommittee who lashed out my personality for according the amendment. I didn't pass, did me, given its life to live a thought towards the GSA, but the Bush White House was not early supporter of a vote. Nevertheless, in 2002, Falcon decided to invest study in assisting risk posed by the GSA. It would have to imagine a more important topic of affair. To tackle it would has to be imagining a topic more likely to inflame me. By early in 2003, a phone was the released report. Most campaigns would have accepted such mild criticism with a most present result reason. But according to Falcon, Reigns and Fame men immediately went to overkill mode. A few days before the report was decided soon, Reigns called Falcon and asked him not issue it when I reaffirmed my plans. Falcon later said they threatened to bring down me, and the agency famously they call it Treasury, and other regulatory agencies asking them to press offense not to release the report. Reigns calls Falcon allegation totally made up. Alone he called Falcon to tell him that it was highly unusual for regulation issue report having its regulated companies meet bring down the financial system. He isn't. There was no threat. Fame was just given February for 2,000,003 was the day Falcon had set for releasing the report. He had flown to New York to give response. Obviously, its fame has awaited to give to speech. He got a call from the White House personnel office informing that the administration was about to announce his replacement. It was no other than Mark Brinkley. The former JP Morgan derivates lobbyist along Falcons there still had the year after the goal he difficult brought a registration later. No Super League Crows, a EU4 report Falcon was humiliated. And yet Falcon won't owe up keeping his job, in part breaking say a few too many employee things during his confirmation meetings later that year. But more than that, the political wings strongly. White House resembling the vehicle there was between the GSA and White House was on. It was Aaron that causes political wings, the Aaron Glias. Kennedy boy when the administration looked around in the wake of the Aaron declares to see what other potential business scandal might hurt it. It was hard to miss Fane and Freire. Some White House ideas began to enjoy call the company against the ageist Operation Noriega. The administration helped fall. It also got huge in the act, which allowed his from 50% of the purchase to 56%. It was conclusively punitive, says a former famous executive. The real significance was so much the percentage increased as it was the fact that the GSA for the first time I had specific single-family goals in metropolitan areas. It could no longer use apartment buildings or referencing to get around the rules. Dow Jones got the copy of the email Fannie Saver has written. You just can't handle scaling. Even Greenspan got involved as the reins were social phrase, but Sample didn't buy finds rational enormous mortgage portfolio. The exemplification have the White House successful in the fall of 2 million of EO and on the preliminary result of this investigation. Fannie said the agency says it willful broken to complex accounting rules sorting derivatives to facilitate some earnings growth, where Freddie had understated its earnings often charged. Fannie will sober than the willful breaking accounting rules. The clean implication was the family maid was cooking its books so that the executive could line their pockets. During the previous 5 years, the hat company had made double in earnings just raining provinces. Find had one more trick oops around a field. There's the in other questions of action where will beyond the bounds of normal regulatory behavior, like a White House. It has gone aware, skipped areas the GSA to public. The Inspection General report they supported to be confidential. Congress, it is possible that by the casing, all the these are question you potentially are making. In responding to EFO, charges reigns was unplugging. These accounting standards are democratic and Franklin Reigns. Reigns, however, had overplayed his hand in demand that CSA, but has calculated wrong on December 15 in 2,000,004 at a meeting that included Reigns Falcon. Sika County's Mike Nicholas Donald Nicolaisen accounting finance my finance representative traded agreed that if they could get it right, not unquote one called Nicolaisen was having it. Many companies out there get it right. He said the estimate was accounting of phenomenon alleged that Fannie's may had oversighted its earnings by 9 billion since 2,000,001, representing a staggering percent. Until finance resenting in which a 50 into in 1998 and 52 million which directly didn't finance meeting its earnings target, rising since the number 2 CFO Tim Howard were forced to step down for agreed paid 350 million civil penalty to the SEC and 50 million to the Treasury. As a part concept, there are many former Fannie executives, including Rain Howard's but who will go to great rights believe that the Ennis scandal was drummed up by EFO and the White House solely to bring Fanny down. In August 2006, the Justice Department took the rather step of publicity accounting that is was dropping its investigation into Fanny's Maya accounting no criminal charges when ever filed. For the matter, the sex never filed civil charges against an individual after an investigation by the law firm Paul. With exonerate Reynolds and any wrongdoing will authority. Obviously, Friday companies questions and the who were charged with looking after help the financial system often simply didn't appreciate the credit risks until it was not late, which is why some finance get rained than begging the victims of the crisis really at the victim that many be boy there by far innocent victims. Well, that is all the lecture, and thank you, teacher.